part of every, I'm going to start over. So folks with disabilities have long been the fiercest fighters for their communities and their needs. While they have been part of every movement for liberation, the movement for disability justice and its principles, which offer an anti-capitalist vision of intersectionality, solidarity, and collective liberation, which is exactly what is needed right now. Disability justice as a framework seeks to end ableism, which is discrimination against people with disabilities, by identifying and fighting these systems that oppress people with disabilities specifically, and the entire working class broadly. At this time, where the Trump administration's savage changes and cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program are putting vulnerable Americans further at risk, disability justice activists and the Freedom Socialist Party understand that all of our movements for liberation need this political clarity and leadership. And from mutual aid programs and boycotts to a general strike, the working class, with the most oppressed as our leaders, can hold our own and fight back against our capitalist oppressors. Today, we are honored to hear from two phenomenal disability justice activists, Brittanie Hernandez Wilson and Sam Rubin. Brittanie Hernandez Wilson is a multiracial disabled activist dedicated to disability justice. Deeply connected to this work, both personally and professionally, she hires domestic home care workers herself. Born in Seattle and raised in Minnesota, she has experience in policy and advocacy, including testifying at the legislature and serving on the Minnesota Task Force on eliminating sub-minimum wage, and has held leadership roles as Equity and Justice Director at the ARC Minnesota and Communications Director at the Minnesota Council on Disability. Brittanie organized with the SEIU Healthcare Union to secure hero pay for home care attendants, with the the Minnesota Coalition for Disability Wage Justice to end sub-minimum wages. Now based in Oakland, she is the California lead home care organizer for Hand in Hand, where she continues her advocacy for a just and caring economy. I'm sorry.
I did not know I would be starting. So do I just go? Okay, cool. So it's really good to be here with everyone today. Thank you to the Freedom Socialist Party for inviting me into this space. Yes, my name is Brittanie Hernandez Wilson. You can call me Britt. My pronouns are she, her. For folks who a visual description may be beneficial, I'm a mixed race Black and Mexican woman with dark curly brown hair. My hair is up right now, looking a little wild. I'm sitting in my wheelchair. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says honor domestic work. Yes, that's right. Okay, so I wanted to start off with just an access statement. I really love to do this wherever I go. So no matter where you're at, this is an invitation to show up as you are. So please use the space that you're in as you need or prefer. I appreciate the attention to the access aisle. And I know there's like a lot of chairs. So like feel free to get comfortable. If it is easier for you to stand up or pace or whatever, like do you. And this is an affirmation that your body mind has needs that deserve to be met. So as was stated, I'm the California lead home care organizer for Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. And as also mentioned, I'm a disabled employer myself. I have home care attendants and rely on care to live. And I help organize other folks who hire home care attendants. My job, my mission, part of my life's purpose is to help build a care economy that really is truly rooted in dignity, in a space where we can all get our needs met. Doesn't have to be one or the other. And also too, before I dive in, I wanted to ground us in why this conversation is so important, not just for people with disabilities, for home for home care workers, for families, for elders, but for all of us. We know that disability is never a question of if, but it is a matter of when. At some point in all of our lives, every one of us is going to be disabled. We all need care. And many of us are already giving and receiving care. And for domestic workers, home care workers, the very conditions of our labor can be disabling, physically, emotionally, mentally. For disabled folks, so many of us actually, the fight for dignity, autonomy, even the right to just exist, right, in our full body minds is something that feels like it's always ongoing. And as mentioned earlier too, right, our movements, are not separate. We're in each other's struggles, past, present, future. We are in each other's histories. The struggle to control our body minds, to have our labor valued, to move freely without fear, all of this is connected. And we cannot win one struggle without the other. So, fun for us, this means building community together, right? Worker to worker, disabled to not yet disabled, and so on and so forth. And it's not optional, right? It's essential. It's actually what is the spice of the movement. It's what makes it juicy. It's what makes it irresistible. It's also what makes it really hard sometimes, like really fucking hard, because we're messy, right, as humans. But I do believe that it is how we move forward. And it is how we make sure, as disability justice reminds us, it's how we make sure that no body mind gets left behind. So no matter where you're at today, with your own learning or understanding of disability, disability justice, ableism, or all the other things that may come up, I want you to know that you're welcome here. So glad that you're here. I sure as hell don't know everything. And I sure make mistakes every day. That's for sure. So again, this is an invitation to show up as you are. So I was asked today to talk about a couple of things like how I came into this work, what's happening right now, a little bit about disability justice. So I think I have like 10 or 15 minutes. Just feel free to like cut me off. I'll be here after for questions, whatever. So I wanted to like start off a little bit about how I came into this work as an organizer. I feel like a lot of it has just been through survival, not like conscious thought about like, I want to be an organizer, more like I'm just trying to make sure I can honestly live and that my community can live too, that my community can be here, my family, my friends, right? I was born with my disability and I've used a wheelchair my whole life. For most of my childhood, my mom was my main caretaker. Black single mom raising two kids, one with a physical disability. And she carried so much of that labor while also trying to navigate all the systems that we needed to live. In Minnesota, I used a waiver system so that I could get access to healthcare, home modifications, my wheelchair, just general things that I needed to live. But along with that came constant surveillance, if you're in these systems, right? And so like growing up, I remember every year my mom like gathering all these documents to prove all of our assets, to prove how little she made. Every year, I was also reassessed to prove that I was still disabled for conditions that the doctors already said from birth would never change. That kind of scrutiny, that kind of pressure, that kind of dehumanization is and has always been baked into my survival, into my family's survival. Growing up, again, I've always had home care attendants, mostly my mom, who were essential to my independence. I want to stop on that word independence really quick because it's not about doing everything on your own. Independence is just about having the say in your life, right? So when I say independence, I don't mean that. It took many, many people to get us all here, right? And so home care attendance care has been essential to me being able to go to school, to work, to live my life. But even as a child, without the language, without the understanding that I do now, I still saw and felt that contradiction. The people who were literally my lifeline were paid poverty wages. To be on this waiver system, my mom had to make below a certain income. I saw her deny promotions so that we could stay in this system. So I saw that contradiction. The people who were literally my lifeline were paid poverty wages or were put and set in these confines, were denied protections. And I think we're forced to live with some fear and insecurity too. Absolutely. So as an adult, I feel like part of me is like fighting back against this from many angles. Again, organizing with SEIU Home Care to help secure hero pay for home care workers during the pandemic. Using our stories, my story, to bring life, right, to body minds that are so heavily politicized. Working on bills to expand Medicaid, to eliminate the asset limit in Minnesota is something I'm really proud of. Testifying against sub-minimum wages. And I think in my bio, it says to end. No, they haven't ended in Minnesota. No, they haven't. That was a typo. Apology. Maybe a manifestation, right? Yeah. Not maybe, a dream that's coming true. Heck yeah. And even through all of that, I don't have the time, but even through all of that, I have had to fight to work, still have to fight to work to prove that I am disabled enough, but yet not, I don't know. To fight to stay in a system that tells me that I'm not disabled just because I can labor. So I guess you could say I've always been involved in this work simply by existing. I moved to Oakland about a year ago, and now I work at Hand in Hand. Again, we bring together domestic employers, people who hire nannies, house cleaners, home care attendants, to fight for a just and caring economy. We demand fair pay, dignity for workers, and also a public investment in home and community-based services, things like Medicaid or Medi-Cal. We were founded in 2010 by a group of employers and allies who had worked together to pass the New York State Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. This victory really showed us how powerful it is when employers work alongside workers, right, to fight for justice, when we understand how our movements are connected. At that time, Jewish employers organized by Jews for Racial and Economic Justice played a key role in testifying and speaking out and helping to win that campaign. And in California, the chapter was started 15 years ago with disabled employers, heavily with disabled employers. People like Jessica Lehman, an incredible organizer based in the Bay, Nikki Brown Booker, Lateef McLeod, and others. And the goal is very simple, right? To recognize that workers and employers are deeply connected, that our care doesn't have to be one or the other, but actually it's essential that we're met together. That disability isn't a matter of if, but a question of when. All of those things. And I really want to be clear that organizing around care, talking about care, invoking care, and making sure that it's embedded in all of our movements and all that we do is not a side issue. It's central to our freedom. It's central to our liberation. Because how society treats care, how society decides who gets care, who gives care, and who's left out tells you everything you need to know about whose lives are valued. Tells you everything you need to know about whose lives are valued. And when you know that disability can happen to you, and that disability often means that in our world that you are disposable, that tells you everything you need to know about whose lives are valued. That tells you everything you need to know about how you are connected to this, how you are connected to this, okay? So if that's one thing you're gonna take away from that, please let it be this, please. Probably got like 5 minutes left. I don't know. So this brings me a little bit about to the moment that we're in, right? You mentioned about, HR1 being passed, this law that is going to mean that up to, well, more, right, than, but it's estimated that 17 million people in this country are going to lose their health care. 17 million. And that's just the estimate. We know there's so many people they're not counting purposefully, so many people that are purposely pushed to the margin, so many people that they're actually hoping are going to die before the reports become published, right? Like, and so this bill is a direct attack on all of us, right? But especially disabled folks, especially elders, immigrants, working class families and people, guts Medicaid, which is really the backbone for so much care in our system. It adds harsh work requirements, even though we know that past attempts only strip people of coverage. It cuts home and community-based services, more people, which means more people will be institutionalized against their will, pushed into nursing homes. This bill also slashes eligibility for immigrants, stripping coverage from refugees, asylees, lawfully hiding people in our country, human beings. Can we just stop there? Maybe should have just started there. Human beings, stop. And so what we're experiencing in this moment is not just budget cuts, right? It is an attack on us. It is a war on us, on disabled people, on elders, on immigrants, on LGBT, all of us, all of us, all of us, all of us. It's eugenics by every other name and also by that name too. Because it's like, it's bold enough right now that we're seeing it that it's also by that name. It's capitalism doing what it was designed to do, to extract from workers, to abandon those that can't profit from it. But before abandoning, making sure we can use this stuff and get as much money from us, right? So why disability justice? Let's bring it back to that. This is what I ground myself in, because again, disability isn't a question of if, it's a matter of when, right? We know this. We all will need care. And the system teaches us to fear that moment. It teaches us to other ourselves from that possibility. It teaches us to push ourselves beyond our limits in a system that is actually designed to disable us. Designed to disable us. But what disabled folks know, what many of us know, not just disabled people, is that interdependence is our strength. Interdependence is not a weakness. It is how we're actually going to get through this. It's actually how we find our power, right? We know the powers that be are scared as hell that we're actually going to find each other, that we're actually going to connect with each other, that we're actually going to have conversations with each other, that we're actually going to feel our hearts like for real and be in this and be human together, that we're going to face our fear, that we're going to face our rage, that we're going to sit with that together and actually grow strength in that. Like that's what they're scared of. And that's our power. And if you don't know much about disability justice, in 2005 or around there, a group of disabled queer activists of color began talking about what they called as the second wave of the disability rights movement, but something that wasn't that rights movement. Because they were naming the need for this framework that went beyond that. They weren't seeing disabled, queer people of color, disabled, Black, brown, indigenous people of color, people that are pushed at the margins. And so disability justice was created. And again, at its core, now a truth that must remain is that disability justice must be centered around the leadership of disabled people of color, of queer and gender non-conforming disabled people. We must be at the center. And as Patty Byrne, one of the founders of Sins Invalid, explained, that disability justice was born in reaction to the ways that the disability rights movement had invisibilized those living at the intersections of multiple oppressions, disabled people of color, immigrants with disabilities, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming disabled people who are houseless, disabled people who are incarcerated, who've had their ancestral land stolen, and so many others. And like I did in the previous panel, like I'll do in every single space, it's so important to remember our ancestors. We lost Patty Byrne earlier this year. She joined our ancestors in late May. And Sins Invalid, the organization that Patty led, wrote that she left her body with peace and grace, surrounded by chosen birth and family in a space filled with tenderness, grief, and immense love. Patty, disability justice leader, comrade, kin, auntie, artist, mentor, visionary, touched and transformed countless lives. Patty was and is and always will be a force of nature, a tsunami of love. Patty was a co-founder and longtime executive and artistic director of Sins Invalid, who is the primary architect, dreamer of the disability justice movement and its 10 principles and core practices that center the lives, wisdom, and leadership of disabled, queer, and trans, and Black and Brown people. So I just want to take a second again to remember all of our ancestors, right? Addie, Stacy, yep, Stacy Park Melbourne. Feel free to say aloud, speak in your heart, sign, right? The ancestors you're thinking of who have transitioned.
Brandon Johnson.
Disability justice has some core understandings. Disability justice understands that all bodies are unique and essential. And this is from Skin, Tooth, and Bone. You can get this on the Sins Invalid website. I'd love to leave a link. We can put a link in the chat too. Please support them in their work. This is directly from them. Disability justice understands that all bodies are unique and essential, that all bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. Yes, yours too, no matter how you identify. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We're all powerful, not despite the complexities of our body minds, but because of them. How beautiful is that? How glorious is that? That no matter who you are, where you are, there's power in your body mind. And that we're all shaped by and confined, right? By race, gender, class, ability, all the things, and that we can't separate those. They're a part of us. And we know that changing laws and policies alone isn't going to be enough. It never was. Laws don't automatically undo the cultural belief that disability is bad, that disabled people are unproductive or disposable. But disability justice acknowledges that disability is experienced differently by by everyone, right? But there's definitely some shared reality.
And then it's gonna give you like a couple minute warning.
Thank you so much. So again, disability justice really insists that none of us are disposable, that our survival has always and will always depend on collective care, especially in the brilliance and leadership of queer, trans, Black, and brown disabled people, and that disability justice is anti-capitalistic in its core, because capitalism depends on ableism, depends on labeling some people as productive and others as burdens, so it can justify exploitation. So if we're serious about fighting the cuts, if we're serious about building things like a general strike, then disabled people must be at the center of this, not an afterthought, not a special issue, but as leaders core and central to this. because our lives, our knowledge, that's a part of the blueprint for survival, always has been and always will be, without a doubt. And so here's what I ask of you. Again, center disabled leadership. Join us in the fights for these cuts. Practice interdependence. And I want to close. Gosh, I have so much to say, and I'm sorry my thoughts weren't as put together as I wish, but I wanted to close by just returning to what disability teaches us, disability justice teaches us, that no body mind is disposable. Not someone in a nursing home, not immigrants or refugees stripped of Medicaid or of care, kidnapped off the street, not a worker who's injured on the job, not disabled organizers in movement spaces, and so much more. Capitalism, powers that be will try to tell us otherwise, that our value is measured in productivity, that care is a cost, that our lives are too expensive to keep. But we know that's not true. We know that care is not a burden, it's the blueprint. It's how we survive, it's how we've survived, and it's how we build our new world. But that sounds so poetic, because I think the new world is here now. I know we can build these pockets here now. We can build spaces like this now. We can inspire each other now. We can be here now with one another, and in a way that is building something new, right? Right here and right now. And so our task is not just to restore benefits or to stop cuts. Our task is to transform, to embody, starting with ourselves, moving out with our neighbors, with our friends, our families, our kin, strangers, to build a movement starting wherever you're at, right? In solidarity and access and interdependence, to build a strike, to build a world that says we all matter, we all belong, with no body mind left behind.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brittany. Okay, and then for our next presentation, I am honored to introduce Sam Rubin, pronouns they, them. Sam is a disabled, non-binary, socialist, feminist revolutionary. They were born right here in the city of San Francisco, and they've been actively fighting for disability justice, healthcare, labor, and so much more for over 20 years. They've been a member of the Freedom Socialist Party since 2013, and they're one of my favorite people.
Okay, so as Brittany touched on, as Britt just touched on, probably the most basic and fundamental of the principles of disability justice is that that others really flow from, is that it must be anti-capitalist. That is absolutely necessary, because the fact is that capitalism will never allow us to have what we need. It's just not going to happen. The system is built to generate as much profit as possible for a tiny ruling class that by now has already hoarded enough wealth and resources to last them hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, while the majority of people struggle just to survive from one day to the next. If harming or killing people will bag the capitalists more money and they can get away with it, you bet they will not hesitate to do it. Horrific illustration of this is the brutal slashing of Medicare funding by an estimated $911 billion over the next decade. And more on that later. But for people with disabilities who need the most healthcare and other vital services to survive, the inadequacy and deadly brutality of capitalism is felt extra hard. We have a wide variety of personal experiences trying to navigate and survive this world that so often cuts disabled lives short. For example, I was born with spina bifida, a pretty complex physical and neurological disability. Um, I went through numerous traumatic medical procedures from childhood, from birth, actually, straight up from birth. I always struggled as a student, but schools I went to, of course, they didn't have the adequate programs and services to help me. They often just didn't know what to do with me. Um, so as an adult, work life or lack thereof has always been a major problem. I worked in special education. You know, I went through the system as a student and then worked in special education for about a decade. And that was an absolute unmitigated disaster that left me with lifelong workplace trauma. After and then after being done really dirty by the school district, I finally was pushed out and had to leave permanently. Um, and then the pandemic hit and did some essential work. Well, I actually started that before the pandemic in 2019, and then it happened. Um, working in grocery and then doing the 2020 census. So in 2020 and 2021, I was doing whatever I needed to do, whatever work I needed to do that I could get, but it was way too much physical work that my disabled body couldn't handle. And I was never granted any accommodations in those workplaces that were hazardous to health and safety to begin with, and just doubly for me. I needed those accommodations. But now, as a result of having to push my body beyond its limits just to make a few crumbs that couldn't even come close to covering my rent and medical bills, I experienced further complications with my disability. And now I'm sitting here in this wheelchair 4 years later, still unemployed, still swimming in medical debt. That's going to take a very long time to pay off. If ever, probably die before that happens. But anyway, there are millions of disabled people with their own similar experiences in this country alone. You know, just heard from another one, there's millions more, right? Now, of course, in some parts of the world, this situation is far worse. Like in the case of war and genocide, these are mass disabling events. Like, for example, in Gaza, as by far the world's highest concentration of amputees. And currently, 10 children lose at least one limb per day on average there because of Israel's bombs. And as we all know, the number of operational medical facilities has been drastically reduced by Israel's targeted bombings, making it very difficult or impossible for people who have such permanent injuries or losing limbs or whatever it is to get the care that they need, including access to prosthetic limbs. Physical destruction of built-up areas also releases toxic chemicals into the air, such as asbestos and other things too. And it releases into the air and water too. That can cause other disabling conditions for a lot of people. A few other countries, such as, for example, DR Congo, they've had similar crises for many years, with the disability because of the civil war. Now, from an economic standpoint, wherever we live under the global capitalist system, one thing is for sure, we are regarded as having less productive value as workers, and we are seen as more of just a burden on the economy. As capitalism strictly judges everything and everyone's worth according to the bottom line, it severely devalues our lives as human beings. And as a result, we are treated as disposable, as an acceptable loss in their ruthless, relenting, and intensifying pursuit of profit. Sometimes, especially in capitalism's ever increasing times of crisis, we are even treated as complete undesirables who should disappear altogether so the capitalist class can maximize their money. Happened, this has happened like in the Holocaust, right? As an FSP member, disabled activist Kendra Scalia wrote in her article, Disability, Justice, and Capitalism Don't Mix. Ableism is fundamentally a class and economic issue. The capitalist system does not make space for most disabled people. Capitalism demands the devaluation of the disabled body and mind. It is capitalism's inevitable devaluation of our lives through this essential profit motive that has led to such atrocities as our healthcare being gutted to cover massive tax breaks for the ultra wealthy, amounting to the largest transfer of wealth in human history. Now, we can and do push for the passage of reforms such as the ADA, Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, and so on. And these can help to some degree within a limited scope in some ways for at least a while. For example, in 1977, just down the street from here, at San Francisco's Civic Center, a large group of disabled activists, including prominent movement leaders and disability rights movement, with Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann and others, they occupied what was the federal building at the time for 25 days to push for the signing of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was successful. And a major key to this victory was the support and solidarity of the broader community and other political groups, including a substantial amount of help on the ground by the Black Panthers, for example. And now 13 years later, in 1990, when the recently proposed, at the time, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was being debated in Congress, over 1,000 disabled demonstrators, mainly led again by disability rights group. This time it was a group called ADAPT, marched in Washington, D.C. from the White House to the Capitol building, which did not have ramps leading up to the entrance at the time. And when they got there, a group of about 60 or so protesters physically demonstrated what it would take for them to enter the building. They ditched their wheelchairs and mobility aids because there was really no other choice, then proceeded to slowly and painfully crawl up the Capitol's big front steps. This hard-hitting public protest became known as the Capitol Crawl, and it significantly escalated the pressure on Congress and President Bush Sr. to pass and sign the ADA, which they eventually did. However, these reforms within capitalism always fall well short of the justice and liberation we all actually need, and they're always vulnerable to being rolled back, which is the inherent systemic tendency of capitalism as it death spirals further and further downward over time. In fact, we are currently experiencing such a regressive trend with the government's move to dismantle Section 504. The fact of the matter is that socialism is the only way for disability justice to become a reality in society, not just disability rights, beyond that, disability justice. Capitalism, the current system in which profit is everything and our lives are nothing, must be comprehensively dismantled. In its place, we need to establish socialism, a system in which all revenue and resources are distributed to meet people's needs. In a socialist society, everybody contributes to it as workers according to their own abilities. For those whose abilities are significantly limited, they receive the resources they need just the same, even if they are unable to work and produce as much as most other people or at all, whatever their situation may be. The activists who fought for reforms such as Section 504 pulled off some incredible and historically important feats. But they were mostly part of the old disability rights movement, as I mentioned, which is not explicitly anti-capitalist and doesn't necessarily look beyond attempting to reform the existing capitalist system, which ultimately cannot ever be reformed to meet the needs of disabled people and fully value our lives. And it won't meet the needs of the whole working class. Genuine disability justice, on the other hand, does go far beyond tenuous piecemeal reform because it recognizes that for disabled people and the entire working class to be free, capitalism must be completely dismantled through revolution. In its place, we have to implement a fully socialist system in which the working class is in control of the state, the economy, all the resources, ensuring that the needs of people, including those who have the most needs, are taken care of. Now, another disability justice principle that I want to highlight is that it must be multi-issue. Now, and some people say intersectional or different words, but similar thing. Now, we do not live single issue lives, right? I think it was Audre Lorde who said that. Neither individually nor collectively. So our only path to liberation is multi-issue, has to be. Disability issues can and do interpenetrate all other issues. People of all races, genders, backgrounds, and more make up the disability community. This is true in the US, of course, but also, of course, internationally, for all peoples around the world. Groups of people who are already oppressed and marginalized, such as working poor people, people of color, working class women, immigrants, have higher rates of disabling conditions and are therefore overrepresented in the disabled community. This is another way in which the movement evolved from disability rights, disability justice. The old disability rights movement has always been dominated by white, cisgender, heterosexual men and is mainly rooted in colleges, nonprofits, and the government agencies that implement these laws, programs, services, whatever reforms that are kind of temporarily in place for people with disabilities. And many of those programs were created through, those reforms that people fought so hard for and are now being destroyed. And, because they're seen as DEI crap, they actually keep us alive. The disability justice movement, as Britt mentioned, there arose in the mid-2000s from the work of disabled radical activists of all races, genders, sexualities, nationalities, and so on, such as Leroy Moore, that Nellie mentioned, Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Park Milburn, just to name a few. The Bay Area in particular is a hotbed of disabled leadership, and it has been for quite a long time. You had back in the disability rights days, the Ed Roberts and Disabled Students Union, who demanded services for disabled students at UC Berkeley. Then later, more disability justice came in, and you had things like the Disability Justice Culture Club, which built much needed mutual aid and community in the depths of the pandemic. And Sins Invalid, the group that Patty led, and that's what it's just a phenomenal disability justice performance art collective that highlights artists with disabilities, their beauty, power, and visions for their liberation. One of the many contributions to the disability justice canon is the 10 principles of disability justice, which, has been mentioned before. Although Patty Byrne, as we said, recently passed away, as did Stacy a few years before, and we've lost some others. Their legacies and everything they taught us lives on. And one of the things that they taught us is that our fight is everyone's fight. And when disabled people win important gains, so does society as a whole.
Yeah.
For everyone. For example, I know for an absolute fact that we are not the only ones who benefit greatly from structural accessibility innovations. It's one of the most obvious examples, right? Such as curb cuts, ramps, all of that. We all use those, right? And there's so many more examples. I could go on for days, but another one of their greatest lessons that they taught us is the essential importance of the leadership of the most oppressed, which Britt also touched on there. Members of specially oppressed groups, such as disabled people, naturally tend to provide the militant and class conscious leadership that all movements need. And those who have the least to lose and the most to gain, the ones who are hit hardest by capitalism's brutality, will be the most crucial drivers of the revolution to overthrow and replace the entire system that oppresses us all. Disability justice carries out this principle in practice by emphasizing the leadership of the most impacted by the system within the disability community, such as disabled people of color, queer disabled people, disabled immigrants, and so on. Of course, this also includes all the lowest income disabled people who lack resources, jobs, housing, healthcare, and have really been through it with the system. And those who have been incarcerated is another. But okay, indeed, in this society overall, people with disabilities face the greatest barriers to healthcare, housing, employment, and other basic essentials of life. Disabled working class people under capitalism are kept in a cycle of poverty. There are major barriers to gaining employment, securing accessible and affordable housing, getting and maintaining the crucial benefits that many of us depend on to live. And you have situations like, even if you have an opportunity to work, you can't do it because you'll lose your benefits, right? There's all those kinds of situations. So these vital benefits, such as Medicaid, they're being brutally slashed by the government, along with the affirmative action programs, right? And the housing regulations, all these things that make living and working possible for so many of us. Disability benefits themselves, they've always been terribly inadequate to begin with, and especially in expensive places like the Bay Area. And it's definitely not getting any better. In general, when you're disabled in capitalist society, achieving stability, security, freedom, independence in your life is extremely difficult and often impossible. Cuts to Medicaid will cause some of the people who need healthcare the most to lose access to it, and in many cases, this is a death sentence. We typically cannot independently afford what we need to live, such as our specialized healthcare. So cutting things like Medicaid will always cost disabled lives. However, we also need to recognize that people with disabilities are fighting back fiercely in the face of these cuts, and we need to keep going, rowing, organizing movement for disabled lives. Many of you have probably seen the very strong protests by disabled people in DC, right? Like, let's keep those things going everywhere. And as all of this is going on, the labor movement needs to get more involved with disability justice. Disabled workers, among the most marginalized in any workplace, Disabled people are typically the last to be hired and the first to be fired. Been through that myself multiple times. Despite the law, employers often fail to provide necessary accommodations and supports for disabled workers. Again, been through that, as have millions. Workplace health and safety is a disability justice issue. Some workers become disabled on the job due to workplace injury, and this typically also leads to the boss terminating the injured worker and abandoning them to avoid paying compensation. A good example, actually, there's the pamphlet that Nellie, that person who wrote that had an experience like that. She was injured on the job. Workers with existing disabilities are at greater risk of further disablement from workplace injury. Sitting here, all workers need comprehensive health coverage. All workers need comprehensive health coverage, regardless of any so-called pre-existing conditions. No matter how much health care you need, it all needs to be covered. Affirmative action programs that help people with disabilities gain employment are now under attack from the federal government because they're DEI crap. Obviously, making it even harder for us to get and maintain employment. It will only increase our reliance on these government benefits to survive, while they simultaneously are decimating the benefit system so it cannot adequately support all those who need it. Okay, I'm just going to mention real quick, the Florida Board of Education just pushed through this thing that's going to phase out the certificate of completion for students with disabilities. And that's going to have a cascading effect. Just can't get jobs, can't get housing, and then being homeless is criminalized. So, create more criminals. Yeah, pipeline to being, considered criminals for people with disabilities, right? So anyway, just heard about that this morning, so okay, so the federal workers who are rebelling against all of this are some of the greatest heroes in the labor movement today, and they have demonstrated incredible solidarity with the disabled activists who have been fighting back themselves, but this must be carried forward. What we really need is a truly massive and high impact movement that brings the whole working class together. Union workers, non-union workers, disabled workers, non-disabled workers, unemployed people of all abilities, retirees, etc. In other words, when I say the whole working class, I mean the whole working class. Best way to make this happen is through organizing and executing a general strike together, with disabled people leading the way to demand the things that we need that capitalism will not provide. The labor movement continues to grow, and it has been increasingly active in recent years. Now is the time to take it further. Historically, in times of crisis, workers have turned to their greatest power by withholding their labor in general strikes, shutting down many industries all at once. General strikes are typically started by unions, but joined by the vast majority of workers, whether they are unionized or not. Community members and unemployed people also play a very important role in general strikes. Whether they are unionized or not, or whether they are even employed to begin with or not, general strikes are an excellent way for disabled people to get deeply involved in the class struggle together with everyone. Disabled people can introduce some of the most powerful transitional demands to a general strike, meaning we demand things we need that capitalism cannot and will not provide. We call that a transitional demand because ultimately we will all have to come to the conclusion that our demands for life and freedom cannot be met under this system, and that it absolutely must be totally replaced by socialism, right? And can't have no half measures in that. And so, kind of get started on all that, down that path, we invite you to, connect with us and keep working with us as we plan for what's next. I have these sign-up sheets. We can pass these around and put down your contact info, because we want to plan and organize and get these things moving. So, and we want to involve all of you, everybody, whoever you are. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much, Brittany. I mean, thank you both for just like really bringing, really connecting, the disability justice fire to, the fire that is kind of everything else right now. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to turn it over to Bay Area FSP organizer Nancy Cato for our fund pitch.
Thank you so much, Britt and Sam, Christina, and everybody for being here. This is such an important ongoing topic, right? And I appreciate what you had to say in terms of it's an ongoing thing. It's not just we put it aside and celebrate. It's like Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. It's like we should be celebrating all these things all the time, and also understanding and incorporating into our lives, because as both speakers said, it affects all of us today. Right? If someone doesn't have something, no matter what that may be, that's affecting all of us. I am here to, this event is a fundraiser for the Freedom Socialist newspaper, which is the voice of revolutionary feminism. And as Sam was talking about the general strike, our current issue is Build for a General Strike. So there's, he covered a lot of the details, but it's also just fun to have and important to have an article in your pocket. I'm asking folks, if you can, to please make a contribution. And you got any change in your pocket, if you got a credit card, if you got whatever, throw it in the basket. We sell the paper for $1 or we give it away. And it doesn't cost us $1 to publish a paper. It costs us way more than that. But information is so important, and information from a working class perspective, even more so. And we know the Chronicle doesn't give it to us, the Times doesn't give it to us. And this not only talks about an analysis from our perspectives, but also what people are doing about it. So it's not just, life is doom and gloom, but people are they're fighting back. And again, those stories aren't being told because they don't want us to know people are fighting back. So I've got a little basket here. There's a little form if you want to fill it out. If you just want to throw some money or a check or whatever in here, please do so. So thank you.